this. We're doing it right now, and then we're also doing it tomorrow afternoon or tomorrow evening as a lesson as well. It's arrays 1 and arrays 2. And so this lecture is going to go by super fast because hopefully most of this is review for us, right? Hopefully during the pre-work especially, everyone looked at arrays, everyone used arrays. So I'll be going through this kind of quickly, but let me know obviously if you have any kind of bigger lingering questions. Overview, yeah, just the bare bones basics of arrays. Okay, what is an array? An array is, we call it a list-like data structure in JavaScript. In other languages like Python or Ruby, it's actually called a list, right? So an array is, for us, just when we talk about it, it's synonymous with this idea of a list. Why is a list important? Well, a list can hold many things. A list can also have something that's really important to us, which is a sense of order, right? When you make a list, like something has to come first, something has to come second, and so on and so forth. And so arrays not only can collect many things, but also kind of assigns a priority level to them, or a position, or a priority. So arrays can hold whatever you want. It can hold strings, numbers, booleans, whatever. It can hold other arrays too, which we'll talk about either last slide today or first thing tomorrow. It can also hold objects. It can hold functions, right? It can hold anything. And so an array, you can think of it as almost kind of this collector of anything you want you can put into an array. And as line 9 shows you, it can hold a mixed bag of everything, right? It doesn't have to be, I can only hold 25 functions. I can hold one function, one number, 2 strings, one boolean, etc. What is a type of an array? Well, if we test it out, we actually see that type of, and we pass an array, we actually get back something called, or not something called, we get back the string called object. And that may seem kind of strange, right? Because so far when we do type of a number, we get back number. When we do type of a boolean, we get back boolean. So why do we get type of, why do we get object back when we do type of? This has more to do with the way that JavaScript implements arrays under the hood. But arrays under the hood in JavaScript are actually just kind of another application of an object. So all this slide is trying to tell you that if you want to figure out whether or not something is an array, using type of is actually not your best tool. Because if you do a type of an array, you might get back object. But if you type of an object, you will also get back an object. And so because of that, there's a better way to figure out something is an array, and that's this isArray function. Notice how when we call this function, right, how we use it is we write array.isArray, and we pass in whatever it is we're trying to test. And array.isArray is very nice, right? It's going to give us back a boolean, true or false, yes or no, right? The question we're asking is this an array? So there's only 2 possible answers here. Notice also how this array is capitalized, which means that we're dealing not with a variable that I created, we're dealing with a class that's been built into JavaScript, in this case, the array class. And so the best way to figure out whether or not something is an array in JavaScript is to use this method called isArray that's built into the array class. And this basically is a check. And so whatever you pass into this function, you're going to get back either a true if it is an array or a false if it's not an array. If you pass an array into this function, you'll get back true. If you pass in an object, you'll get back false, right? Whereas with type of, there is an ambiguity. This takes that away. Any questions? It's good? All right. Yeah, cool. All right. Bracket access, also something that I think we've touched already. A lot of people talk about the similarities between arrays and strings, and there are quite a bit. But don't think that everything you can do in one you can do with the other. There are some limitations. But we have seen bracket access with strings before, right? On yesterday's workshop that we went through this morning. So bracket access basically means that I have an array or a string or anything that's iterable. If I have an opening and closing brackets after it, I'm going to pass in something into those brackets, and that something is going to be the position that I'm looking at, right? So therefore, if I'm trying to figure out from a position, then I have to be passing in what data type. A number, right? It has to be an index. I pass in a string there. There's no position called a string, right? There's a position called index 0, index 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. But there's not any other data type. And so when we use bracket access, all this is saying is, hey, we have an array. Afterwards, you can put in open and closing square brackets. And if you pass in a number, it will give you the element at that position. So so while that lets you kind of check to see what the element is in that position, if we now add an equal sign to it, what this does is it's going to actually reassign that element, right? It's going to actually say, hey, whatever was there before, let's now override it with this new thing that we're checking, right? So here we have George, John, Thomas. When we do names index 0, we're saying, hey, whatever was in names index 0, let's set that equal to Washington instead. And so that basically overrides the previous first element of the array with now this new value. And once again, when you override it, you can override it with anything, right? You can override a string with an object or a function or another array or whatever. Arrays inherently don't really care, so you have a lot of flexibility to just replace elements in the array with whatever you want. Okay. So one of the things that I think in the workshop yesterday, you guys had the problem called crazy caps, where it was like I think your job was to capitalize every other letter in the string, right? I'm sure every group kind of hit up against a wall at one point, which was, hey, I can't change like one letter in a string, right? Like if I access the third letter in a string and try to capitalize it, it doesn't stay capitalized. Why is that? And the answer really is that certain data types in JavaScript are called primitive or immutable, which means they can't be changed. However, arrays are mutable. Arrays can be changed. And so what that means is once I create an array or a list in JavaScript, not only can I change, what the elements inside of it are, I can also do what? I can also add new values. I can take away existing values, right? If I have a list of 8 things, I can take away the last 7 if I felt like it. I can remove the one in the middle. I can replace the first one with something else. So once with an array and also with an object, these are called mutable data types. It's because we have, more or less like full control over editing or changing any aspect of it. So this is just to show that, hey, when I have an array and I have a string here, right, I can change the first element of the array to be G, but I can't change the first letter of the string to be G. Oh, sorry. So whereas my array is able to be changed, my string can't be changed. And so an array obviously also offers us this additional flexibility that we don't see in strings. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some. Sorry, that was just like a graphic that doesn't load quite well, so I'll just skip it. Okay, so now we'll talk about a few things in arrays that are very useful. The first one is something called the .length property, and we call it a property because it's not a function. Like normally when I do, like when I call something on like a dot slice, like I'm actually invoking a function, right? Or when I do array.isArray, I'm actually invoking a function. This .length is actually not a function. It's the way we use it is we treat it almost like a property, right? It's just like a known. It's like a known set of information around it. But just know that .length is special, that we don't need to invoke it because it's not a function. What .length does is for any given array, if you just call .length on it, it will always give you back a number of how long the array is. If you give it an empty array, it will give you back 0. If you try to do something that's not an array and call .length, you probably get back, hey, this thing doesn't have a .length property, right? So the good thing about the .length property for arrays is that not only does it tell you how long the array is, it's always guaranteed to give you back something that's a number data type. Okay, so that's like the one kind of thing where we don't need to invoke it; we just use it directly. .length. Everything else from here on out, we actually need to invoke because they're no longer just properties; they're actually methods. They're functions that are attached to arrays that we can use. So when we talk about the array class in JavaScript, like I said, it's a built-in class, right? So what that means is not only can we use it, it means JavaScript's also decided, hey, there's a bunch of like useful things that people always want to do with arrays. Let's make it really easy for them to do those things, right? Like let's pre-build methods for them in it. So with arrays, the basic message we're talking about, the first one is probably the most common one, which is .push, right? .push basically just adds whatever you're passing into the .push into the end of the array. Okay. I like to distinguish. This is a typo here. This should be all be new length should be one variable name. With any given function here, there's three things to distinguish between. The first one is what the function does. The second thing is whether or not it changes the original array, and the third thing is what it returns. Okay, so for .push, what it does is it adds an element or elements to the end of the array. Okay, whether or not it changes the original array, the answer is yes, it does change the original array, right? If I have an array with three things and I say, hey, array.push a fourth thing, now my original array is going to have four things, okay? And lastly, what does it return? Well, in this case, what this function returns is the length of the new array. So it's going to be whatever the length of the older array was, plus however many elements you're adding in this case. If I want to add more than one thing, all I gotta do is pass in more things into the push function, right? So if I want to add 8 things like names.push, James, comma, David, comma, John, comma, whatever, like it'll just keep adding it to it. Okay? Yeah.
Would you be able to like push something to an array that's like global, but like push it in a function? Would it stay like pushed in the array? Like, would you be able to do that? Ever?
Yeah, so when you edit a global variable that is able to be edited, you will be changing that variable for everyone.
Okay.
And that's why global variables are really bad, is because like you don't know who's changing in the middle. Yep. Cool. All right, so that's .push, which is to add something to the end of the array. Then .pop then will be kind of the corollary to that, which is, hey, I want to remove something from the end of the array. Notice how .pop takes in no arguments, right? Because it's provisioned to do only one thing, which is to remove the last thing in the array. What it does is it removes the last thing in the array. Does it change the original array? Yes, it does. So whenever you use it, just be careful that once you remove something from the original array, you can't really get it back. And then lastly is, what does it return? Well, very conveniently, what it returns is the thing that it just removed, right? So whatever it is that you just popped off, like, you will have access to it if you choose to store it. In this case, we stored whatever got removed in this Jefferson variable, and so we console.log out names. We see the last element got removed, now it's stored in John, and when we console.log out Jefferson, we see what got removed was this string called Thomas. Okay, so push adds things to the end of the array. Pop removes the last thing from the array. Yeah.
Can you put a number in there and take off the last two?
No. It just removes the last one thing. Okay, so then we move on to, well, we've done a lot with like adding to the end of it. What if I want to I've already removed from the last thing in the array. What if I want to remove the first thing in the array, right? And that's what .shift does. .shift removes only the first. It only removes the first element in the array. And if I have a list, if I have a bunch of people online, I take away the first person online. Well, not only do I remove the first person, everyone else's position now goes up 1, right? So everyone else's index shifts or decreases by 1, and so that's what we call it, the shift function. So in this case, we have an array of George, John, Thomas. When we call names.shift, what the function does is it removes the first element in the array and shifts every other element's index up by or down by 1. Does it edit the original array? Yes, it does. This will remove the first element from the original array. And what does it return? It will return whatever it just removed, right? So very similar to pop. It will say, by the way, if you want to call .shift, I'm going to give you back that thing that I just removed from you. And then lastly, not very creatively, there's the unshift method, which works kind of like push, except what unshift does is unshift actually adds one or more elements to the front of the original array, right? So not only is it changing the original array as well, what it does, it now shifts everyone else's indexes up by 1, right? Like everyone moves further back in line because we're adding something to the beginning of the array. And then what does it return? It returns back the new length of the array. So very similar to how .push works. So between push, pop, shift, and unshift, we're going to talk about, so those are the kind of 4 ways to add or remove something from the beginning or the end of the array. We'll talk about how to edit things in the middle of the array. It's a little more involved tomorrow. But these 4 are the ones you'll be dealing with primarily in today's workshop. I think we have 2 more functions. One is index of. And index of at this point should look very familiar to you, right? Because we kind of built it already this morning. What index of does is it basically takes it. You call the array dot index of, you call function, and you pass in an element. What it will do is it will actually look for that element for you. If it finds it, then it will tell you the index of the first match, right? Just like earlier this morning. If it doesn't find it, it will return back -1, saying, hey, this thing doesn't exist, or this thing exists at the negative index, which doesn't exist, I guess. And then lastly, we have our slice method, So index of doesn't change the original array. It doesn't change anything, right? It just returns back a number to you that tells you at which index that match is found, if at all. And then last thing, or maybe second to last thing, is the slice method. Slice is also a method that we've seen a little bit before. What slice does is slice basically makes a copy of an array for you. Slice takes in a few arguments. The two most common ones we'll talk about. The two most common ones we'll talk about are just the first two. Basically, it says it will take in two numbers. The first number is going to be the index at which you want to start copying, and the second number is the index at which you're going to stop at, but not including that number. So in this case, if I want to do names.slice 1, 2, and I want to store this in a variable called one-term precedence, what it does is it's going to go through this names array. It's going to go to index 1, which is John, and then say, okay, I want to copy everything from John up until index 2, but not including index 2. So in this case, that's just what? That's just John, right? And when I print it out, I see indeed that's what just John is, right? So slice makes copies of an array based on the positions that you give it. It does not change the original array. It's super safe, right? Because it creates a copy of a subset of that array. And then what it returns is the new array that it copies. So if you ever write names.slice by itself without storing the value anywhere, then you're basically not doing anything useful, because that value is not gonna, if you're not storing it or capturing it somewhere in a variable, well, it's just not going to be used later on, right? So whenever you use names.slice, you always want to make sure that you're capturing the output of that somewhere, or at least you're moving the output of that function to somewhere where it can be used. And then I already said that it does not modify the original array, so therefore it's really safe. One shorthand for .slice is if I call .slice without passing in any arguments, by default what that does is that gives me a brand new copy of the entire array, right? So if I just want to make a copy, rather than saying starting at 0 all the way until array.length -1, it'll just say, if I give it nothing, it'll just say, great, here's a copy of the entire array for you to play around with, right? So it does not change the original array, and it gives you back a brand new copy of the entire array. And then the rest of this is just a few things we can do, right? We can copy it. You can use names copy. We can slice it, which makes a copy of the entire thing. We can then, in a copy, we can change the third element to Paul. We can add in wrangle to the very end. And when we console log it out, we'll see that the copy gets changed, but the original does not. Oh wow, there's a few more of these than I thought. That includes, it's almost like a lightweight version of .indexOf, whereas .indexOf tells you if there's a match and where the index of the first match is. .includes just tells you true or false if the value even exists, period. Right? So if it's true, it means the match exists somewhere in there. We don't know where. We don't know how many matches we found. We know that there's at least one match, and then false obviously indicates that there's no matches in the array for the element we're looking for. Okay, and this is the last one, I believe. Dot reverse. The dot reverse method is something that you want to be careful in using, because like push and pop and shift and unshift, it does change the original array. So if I have an array, I say array dot reverse. Well, guess what? Now my array is going to be permanently reversed. Obviously, I can undo it by calling reverse on it again, but just know that dot reverse. It doesn't create a reverse copy of the array. It actually reverses the original array. Cool. All right. That was a quick sprint through the array section. Any questions on... And the reason why I didn't spend too much time on going through the slides for each individual method is because as you go through today's workshop, it probably helps you to just have it pulled up so you can kind of use it as a reference guide. The more you use it, the better, the more familiar you'll get with it. I guess more importantly is, are there any questions on kind of the fundamentals of an array, of how to access something, how to change the values, what it can and can't do? Anything? Good? More workshops? Yeah. Yeah. You say?
There's no problem with like storing things like null or any like not a number, that kind of stuff is all fine.
Yeah, it can store anything in
Okay.
Java. Anything you can create in Java, it can store it.
And it doesn't all have to be the same.
It can be anything you want, as many types as you want.
And what was shift and unshift again? Shift was to take it out of the array, and unshift was to
Yep,
add
shift
to the array.
removes it from shift removes the first element from the array,
And
and
unshift adds.
adds to the first element of the adds in the first position of the array. Well, it adds things, I guess, to the beginning of the array because you could be adding multiple things using unshift.